and welcome back to the channel. I've said before that the 1960s were a weird time in cinema, particularly American cinema, which reflected and propelled forward the cultural changes of the decade. To demonstrate my point, here are two American crime movies that were made only 5 years apart, but which have totally different attitudes to crime, criminals, women, and society. So let's get started. William Asher's neo-noir thriller Johnny Cool is definitely a hidden gem. Henry Silva stars as Salvatore Giordano, an Italian criminal who grew up fighting the fascists with the resistance fighters in World War II. As a grown-up, he's mentored and adopted by an exiled mafiosi called Johnny Collini, played by Mark Lawrence. Salvatore renames himself Johnny Cool and goes to America as the instrument of Collini's vengeance against the American mobsters who betrayed him. He knocks off some New York mafiosis and meets a beautiful socialite divorcee, Darian Guinness, played by Elizabeth Montgomery. She's cool on him at first, but warms to his self-confidence after a time. Johnny Cool was filmed just before Montgomery married the movie's director, William Asher, and together they started the cultural phenomenon that became Bewitched.
Says we should leave her something to remember us by.
When Darian is sexually assaulted by a pair of mafia goons who are looking for Johnny, he attacks them in a car park, gives them a quick stiletto to the wedding tackle, and lets them bleed out. Nothing beyond that is said about the assault. As Johnny infiltrates and undermines the mob, Darian comes along with him, but things do not end well for either of them. Having said that, there are some truly cool and weird things about this B-movie, including the actors we get in small roles. We have Telly Savalas as the head of the New York mob.
You, Mr. Crumline. You're so big in your mouth, huh? A man comes into a bar, makes trouble. Don't you know enough to walk away?
Jim Backus, who we know mostly for comedy roles, in spite of the fact that he played James Dean's father in Rebel Without a Cause, gets a great scene as a corrupt construction company owner.
Fishing expedition. He thinks the man from Rome is behind it.
Collini?
It's nothing. The way I put old Cool out, he'll stay out.
But Vince never calls unless he's worried about something.
He's getting old. They all are.
And Brad Dexter playing a mafia guy in California who gets blown up in his swimming pool. Perhaps the strangest of the guest stars in this movie is John MacGyver, who most people know for being the sympathetic clerk in Breakfast at Tiffany's. He gets two great scenes as a casino boss called Obie Hines. In one of them where he forces a beautiful woman into sex work to pay off her gambling debts, and then another one where he holds up Johnny Cool with a sawn-off shotgun. This is great playing against type. Perhaps the biggest star in the movie is Sammy Davis Jr., who plays a gambler called Educated at a crap game who can roll any combination of dice required on demand.
7, a winner.
All of them playing really off-the-wall characters. We even get a little bit of a role for Elisha Cook Jr. in this one as well. The movie has a great jazz score by Billy May, theme song written by Sammy Cahn and Jimmy Van Heusen, who wrote a lot of Sinatra songs. And the movie has a frenetic pace that races us through Johnny's bulldozer approach to the vendetta with the mob. Without spoiling the satisfyingly WTF ending of this movie, the moral lesson that comes out of this relatively inexpensive and utterly bonkers crime flick is that if you cross the mob, they will do things to you that John Kramer wouldn't do to you in a Saw movie. It's almost like William Asher made a movie for the mafia, a cautionary health and safety film to dissuade people from crossing the mob. I like Johnny Cool a lot. It's clumsy at times, but it moves fast. The actors are chosen really eclectically. The soundtrack by Billy May is great. And the ending is, I can only describe it as being like the build-up of a torture porn movie without the torture porn. It's something that you got to see. I know some people like the 1999 Pierce Brosnan and Rene Russo remake of this movie, but I don't. Norman Jewison's original film was groundbreaking at the time, and it's still a sumptuously shot, incredibly well-scored crime movie, which was at the time called A Love Affair Between Two Bastards. Playing against type as a wealthy businessman, Thomas Crown, Steve McQueen gives us one of his best roles. Crown is a successful man who is empty inside. Having conquered the business world, he turns to crime, planning and executing a bank robbery across the street from his offices without ever getting his hands dirty. He interviews the 4 guys for the job anonymously, including Jack Weston and Yaphet Kotto in one of his first film roles, and coordinates their action via payphones. He then just has to cruise along and pick up the loot from a dead drop in a bone orchard. The robbery nets him a cool $2.6 million, which was a lot more money in those days, and the cops led by Paul Burke's Eddie Malone are baffled. The bank's insurance company calls in an investigator, Vicky Anderson, played by Faye Dunaway. Vicky is as ruthless and as determined and as smart as Crown is. She uses old school physical media to track down one of the robbers, and she data mines airline flight records to find Crown. The Thomas Crown Affair is a movie that couldn't be made 5 years earlier, if for no other reason than the multiple dynamic image video technique used in the title sequence during the robbery and in several action scenes didn't exist until it was on display at Expo 67 in Montreal in 1967. Steve McQueen saw it used there and suggested it to the director. The technique and the masterful editing by, among others, Hal Ashby makes it work. And there's no reason this movie wouldn't work. You got Norman Jewison's direction, 2 of the most charismatic stars in the world at the time. And between all of that, it makes up about 60% of the wonderfulness of this movie. The other 40% is Michel Legrand's magnificent soundtrack. Legrand had been doing great work in France all through the 60s, and in 1968, the same year he did the Thomas Crown Affair, he also did the scores for movies as diverse as How to Save a Marriage and Ruin Your Life, Sweet November, and Ice Station Zebra. The guy had real range, and in the 60s he was hellishly prolific. In fact, Michel Legrand's score was so good that Norman Jewison and Hal Ashby actually edited the famous chess seduction scene in the movie to the music that Legrand provided them, rather than the other way around. It was that good, and it pays off. The images merge perfectly with the soundtrack as the silent negotiations take place between Vicky and Crown as they play chess. It's funny, it's interesting, it's imaginative, and it tells you exactly what each character is thinking by a combination of the acting, the direction, and that wonderful soundtrack. It's a magical piece of cinema.
And whose head are you after?
Yours.
Mine.
Yours.
And the movie also has a message about the hollow heart of what was known in the 1960s and 1970s as the Playboy philosophy, as espoused by Hugh Hefner in his magazine. Whatever Thomas Crown does, he's not happy or satisfied. All the toys, the games, the women and the schemes mean nothing. And the movie sticks that landing right at the end in a memorable and really a bit of a downbeat ending. If you compare and contrast the two movies, you can see the vast cultural difference between 1963 and 1968, even in just the way movies were made. The 5-year difference between them doesn't seem like much, but the world changed in those 5 years, particularly in popular culture. And while I'm not saying one movie is better than the other, though, of course, The Thomas Crown Affair is a much better movie, I'm saying that the approaches taken by filmmakers to certain subjects moved on a lot in those 60 months. In some ways, Johnny Cool feels like a period piece movie, but there's something ineffably modern and contemporary about the Thomas Crown Affair, and I can't quite put my finger on what it is. Let me know if you know what it is. But there's something that feels modern compared to the 1950s, early 1960s aesthetic of Johnny Cool. And I kind of find that interesting, and I'm still digesting it having rewatched the films. So thank you very much for watching. I don't have an Actor of the Week for this week. I will have one for next week, so I apologise, time got ahead of me. But as always, look after yourselves. And I got in trouble for saying this from somebody who was an anti-vaxxer, but I'm going to anyway. Get the jab if you haven't already. Watch some good crime movies from the 1960s. Watch some bad crime movies from the 1960s. I could go on and on with crime movies from the 1960s. There are so many cool ones, but I won't just yet. So take care of yourselves, and I'll catch you next time.